All right, we're going to go to Dayton, Ohio, and Schrantz is going to take us there, and she's going to give you an overview, obviously, of the historic aspects of Dayton, because she is a dual degree candidate, getting both an architecture degree as well as a historic preservation certificate degree, actually, not certificate. So, Emma, take us to Dayton.
All right, this is a new experience. Hi, my name is Emma Schrantz. I am a dual degree candidate for the Master of Architecture and Master of Historic Preservation program. I wanted to start my presentation off by thanking the members of my committee, my chair, Carl Dupuy, Dean Don Linebaugh, and Professor Brian Kelly from the architecture program. So, one of the things that when I think of how my programs interact is the idea of, how architectural interventions can actually support the rehabilitation and revitalization of neglected historic districts across the Midwestern United States. This is a very common situation in the area of the United States known as the Rust Belt, where my home state, Ohio, is obviously growing up there, very familiar with some of these places. So I wanted to see how architectural language and architectural solutions can help revive places that have been neglected or lost to time. So when I think about legacy and I think about historic preservation and architecture, one of the big issues today is sustainability. But I see sustainability as more than just green technology. I think that there's really a lot more that can go into this. One thing looking in Dayton, Ohio is the idea of sustaining industry, sustaining legacy, and sustaining community. We're not just making places more green and more energy efficient, but we're also making sure that they are economically viable, they are socially viable, in ways that people can gather and connect. So my project attempts to find the intersection between these three aspects within the city to create a new urban node for Dayton, Ohio. So Dayton, Ohio is the 6th largest city in the state. The population trends follow very similarly to many Midwestern cities, where you have kind of an explosion of growth at the beginning of the 20th century related to innovation in manufacturing. But as manufacturing began to leave the areas, then you start to have a population decline. The city is noticing that this drop in population is starting to level out, which is a good sign that people are returning back to the city. And as people return, they're going to be looking for places not only to live, but to get to know their neighbors, interact, and kind of celebrate life. So Dayton is a city that, again, was connected by many roads and railways. The National Pike ran right along the main arterial 3rd Street, which is where my project is situated. There are 5 waterways that all conjoin at this location, which made the city especially prone to flooding, which is was then remediated after a flood in 1914. And so obviously you can see how the rail lines kind of define the growth of the city outwards. So the area that I focused on was this little pocket right to the west of the Great Miami River. This is known as the Dunbar Village, named for 3 very esteemed Daytonians, 2 of which you probably are familiar with, Orville and Wilbur Wright, who are famously known for their aviation history, especially connected to College Park, Maryland. But they have some of their earlier business and innovative legacies include bicycle construction and sales, and they also ran a printing press with their friend Paul Laurence Dunbar, who was the first published African-American poet in the United States. He was internationally acclaimed, he was a friend of Frederick Douglass, And his life is absolutely fascinating. But when we talk about legacy, we often pass over or misplace certain legacies in favor of these broader national narratives. But in reality, there's a lot more stories to kind of explore in these areas. So looking at kind of an overview of the village itself within the quarter mile, this project has a couple unique situations. It's situated as one of the only mature commercial districts still remaining in the city that was related to streetcar development. But it was also tucked in a very residential area that just so happens to be next door to a national park site. So you have this added kind of layer of community to where you are balancing residential concerns and you are balancing tourism interests as well. How to attract people to visit the neighborhood and stay within the community. There are two historic districts within this neighborhood. The West 3rd Street Historic District is the one that I'm going to focus on today. So when we talk about legacies and how they can also inspire architectural development and language, two of the things that I was interested in was this early printing story between the Wright brothers and Paul Laurence Dunbar, and also the innovation within the city of Dayton, which is at one point had more patents than any other city in the United States, including the pop tab beer can. So, primarily my focus was on this industrial facility right at the heart of the neighborhood, which is the Gem City Ice Cream Building. This was built in 1886 and was actually the site of the Wright brothers' first cycle exchange location, but it was pretty much rehabilitated in 1914 as a fully fledged ice cream factory, also one of the first in the city and the state. So it ties more into the broader legacy of industry and manufacturing within the city of Dayton itself. It's an industrial vernacular building. And so you can see from some of the historic photos that there is also this similar language to bicycles and printing presses, that you have mechanical elements. So Dayton, also mirroring many other cities, declined beginning in the 1930s, and there were the area has been affected by racially biased housing principles, including redlining, that led to some severe economic disinvestment in the community. And in 1966, riots broke out related to the murder of a young man, young African-American man within the neighborhood. And since then, it kind of shattered the sense of safety and connectivity of the community. And so today, some of the present conditions are a direct result of that situation, or that event. So looking kind of at the site, you can see the historic district and you can see the Thesis site located along West 3rd Street. But when we analyze what has happened in the neighborhood since 1966, 35% of the area within the village is actually vacant or underutilized. There are many demolished buildings and parking lots that kind of scatter throughout the neighborhood. So there's an opportunity here to kind of stitch together some of these vacant lots and create new housing opportunities, as well as new venues for socializing and food and drink.
Quick question for you.
Yes.
Underutilized means that, for example, what's the difference between underutilized and vacant?
So underutilized and vacant means that there is either broken parking lots or just green space. Underutilized lots, like the one up with the yellow, has a parking lot, but it also has some very small structures that aren't appropriately dense to the neighborhood. So, or there are some historic buildings that are also underutilized as well. So there's an old factory building here that could be utilized for studios or apartments or other types of projects, but are now vacant. So looking at the aerial perspective of my site, you can start to see some of the neglect effects on this district. Right now we have 4 buildings of concern that are protected within the historic district. I mentioned the ice cream factory building, but there's also a neoclassical theater from 1912. One of the oldest buildings in the city, which is the red brick one, which is Maury's block, and the Pryor building, which is a very traditional early 20th century retail and office building. So some interesting disparities, I feel like, in the architectural language and treatment of the neighborhood is that directly across the site, or across the street from my site, there is the National Park Service building, which has been fully rehabilitated and is an example of preservation successes. But if you look across the street at my site, you can start to see a very different story play out. That you have the disinvestment and neglect by the city who owns this lot. And actually in 2012, the city filed for demolition of this property, which was denied by the state because it is a contributing resource to a historic district. But as a result, they've since let it, deteriorate more for the past 9 years. So just a picture of the interior and the buildings on the site that, the structure is still there and is still functional, but years of people not caring and the city not caring gives us an opportunity to try bold solutions to save these historic places. So you might be wondering, why beer? Why in this location? So American Breweries, you probably are familiar, is a growing trend. Yeah. So it's a little early for that.
You just got their attention.
I should have started with that. So American breweries are experiencing massive growth as a result of legalization of home brewing after Prohibition. We have over 7,000 individual breweries that are largely at the local level that are operating within communities all across the United States, and they are operated by people that live in those communities. So the Ohio Craft Brewers Association actually has some statistics on basically the impact that this has had across the state. Is that there's $2.6 million contributed to the state economy, and it's actually the 7th largest beer network and impact in the entire United States. So Ohio is actually at the forefront of the craft brewing scene in the United States. And this brings jobs and this brings economic opportunity. So looking back at that kind of Venn diagram, the intersections of industry, community, and legacy, that you have reviving local industry. This is another brewery space within the city of Dayton, and this gives an opportunity for a former industrial space, like a ice cream factory, to be reutilized as an industrial space. It allows us to explore the agricultural heritage of the state of Ohio. So I'll talk a little bit more about hops yards as we go into the design. And then celebrating community building. So we look at third places, which are the informal social spaces outside of work or school that allow us to meet with our community members and get to know them and, have a meal and go to a farmer's market, all of the different activities that you want to do outside of your home. So getting into the actual design proposal. So this is the site now, and then my proposal, which is to remove 2 of the non-contributing historic buildings that are underutilized their locations, and replace it with a quarter acre hops yard, a greenhouse structure that works with a local brew pub, and it provides a new retail opportunities for local business owners and new office spaces as well. With the central facade being the creation of an open, public, flexible space that is being called the beer garden. So looking at the process of craft brewing, over here, I started to overlay this on the site and looked at the site as a process. So starting at the beginning where you're growing the ingredients that go into the beer, you're then milling, brewing, fermenting, and then serving the beer on site and to the people that live there, and then moving through the site to keg and recycle and use anaerobic digestion to help promote the sustainable aspects of the industry. So the program, we're looking at obviously the recreation of retail space in the neighborhood. The statistics right now is that the rental occupancy within the neighborhood is 100%. So there's growth in business in this area, and so by providing new retail opportunities, we can help support that growth. The project also includes renovation of the Midget Theater building, which is the historic theater, so reintroducing that entertainment venue back into the neighborhood. The flexible beer garden, the brewery, tap room, and the hop yards and greenhouse spaces. And then the second floor just has the brew pub, like a more private dining room, as well as second floor office spaces above the historic buildings. So looking at the site in kind of perspective, this gives us an opportunity to utilize the Secretary of Interior standards to make sure that we are reintroducing sympathetic architectural solutions into the historic buildings that also allow it to be preserved while promoting new use. Rehabilitating the Midget Theater building again, and then also providing this open space for the community to gather and have various types of events throughout the year. So looking kind of on the inside of that space, I envisioned it as something that was a two-story open space that could be flexible. You could have a traditional beer garden set up, in summer months, but you could also have markets, you could have music events, and kind of whatever the neighborhood ends up needing it for. And then looking at how the new architecture kind of supplements the historic architecture, we used some of the scale and the horizontal elevation to guide the design of this facade, using wood louver systems to be able to promote air inflow, as well as deflect some of that southern light that is affecting the facade. And you might notice in this rendering the water tower. The idea behind the water tower was to provide ability to recapture rainwater and provide on-site water treatment, but also creating a visual landmark for the neighborhood, kind of attuned to Kevin Lynch's theory of image of the city. And so kind of more to the appearance of including hops yards in an urban setting. Hops grow up to 20 feet tall, and they tend to match the scale of this kind of lower historic district. So it's a way to kind of bring that agricultural heritage and make the ingredients in beer more visible to the public. And then one of the major components of my project is the spine. There's a pergola design that runs throughout the project. This is a way to distribute the various water, glycol, fire suppression systems that go throughout the site. And it allows forklifts to be able to maneuver in and out and travel along a continuous path throughout the industrial spaces on the site. And it's would be a standout color so that it would the regular visual language would remain consistent throughout the project. And this would also allow processes of tourism to kind of come into play. There is kind of a large tourism element behind breweries, and so by providing social spaces that also attract residents and tourists, it provides a place that people can come together and celebrate the heritage of the community. And then that's pretty much what I have. Sorry.
Hey, real
Yes.
quick, the houses to the north, are those, it looks like you did some info work up there. Are the ones that were made able to knock those down if you wanted to?
That one, some of them are historic. There's only 4 that remain on this site specifically. So the idea was to infill with kind of in-kind houses, but to provide duplexes or other styles of housing than single family, to try to diversify the housing stock and provide more affordable options than just single family homes. Most of the homes in the area are 3 to 5 bedroom, which for a lot of people is not the way housing trends are going, so to speak.
That was a lovely presentation, thank you. I really do like the approach to the city block and filling it in. It's a very sympathetic solution that you provided with compatible materials and scale, and your infill is appropriately scaled and it's of its time. We know it's not a replica of the past. It's something fresh and new will entice people to explore both sides of 3rd Street. So I think it's very commendable. I was wondering if in the hops yard or in the industry and in the production, can people go through them? Is there a place for people to have a space outside? You're inside the beer garden, and that's a lovely place when it's raining or the weather's inclement. But in the parking area, is that a place that can be grassed over and outdoor seating and things like that?
Yeah, and kind of as I envision this project, as far as the small parking space that would be, it's sized in a way that it would be able to be utilized for outdoor events as well. I would utilize permeable paving solutions so that it's not just another parking lot in the neighborhood, that it brings some of the greenery and brings some of the stormwater management aspects of those spaces.
So this might get a little bit too specific about hops.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea if that amount of hops services the amount of beer?
Actually, I did size it.
Can you talk about that?
So small, so brew pubs kind of have definitions of the size and output capacity. So this is at a microbrewery scale, according to the Brewers Association. And based on the research that I did, usually 1/4 to a 1/2 acre of hops is enough to service a small brew pub like this. Obviously, in the first couple of years, it might be kind of trial and error, which is why it's kind of an experimental urban hops yard. Not a lot of these structures exist within city spaces, so I think it's a really great way to visualize the basically kind of how beer is made. I feel like not a lot of people are familiar with how hops grow, so that was a really early concept that I wanted to include.
So I guess that gets me to, I'm happy that you had figured that out. Part of me says, yes, I appreciate that it's a sympathetic approach to the architecture, but another part of me says, gosh, this is Dayton, Ohio, and it is innovation capital kind of the world. I recall from my thesis class, another colleague who did his thesis on an innovation center, because Dayton is like, the place for it, where it all sparks from. So part of me says, the architecture isn't very innovative in a way. I mean, the idea is, but another part of me says, well, maybe this hops area is a place where you could really go kind of gangbusters, and maybe you're providing something that is different to the system, or expands on the system and really blows it kind of out of the water. So just something to think about. I definitely appreciate the Secretary of the Interior standards and the synthetic approach, but I agreed with Katie when she was talking about an exterior space as well.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. It's elegant. It's the word that came to my mind. I appreciate some of the images you have. The site perspective is very helpful for me to understand the site, what is now, what is in the future. You made some fundamental moves I think are good. I like how you continue the street edge with this framework. You've got to make a possible courtyard. You might want to look, there's a project in Cambridge, Massachusetts by Coder Kim where the parking lot, it's a parking lot, but it's also a plaza. And you might want to look at that, where this becomes, it's both ends. When we look at it one way, one day there's cars and one day there are not cars. So fantastic sort of possibilities here. My only concerns is the nature of this as a front street. It's a back, but it's also a front of the French lane. That would be my one. I'd love to see some studies for your portfolio of that street.
Okay.
You're starting to do it here, I believe, right? There's some connection. But I also think that the rooftop, a lot of this gray roof, in terms of the problem I'm having with this is that this is hops that only grow about 4 months of the year, maybe, and it's going to be empty. And I'm wondering if this is rethought and these roofs remade into hop yards. I'm not sure. Just a little worried about the edge of that corner up here and what that'll be like between, say, October and April.
Christmas trees.
There you go, Christmas trees.
This is as has already been said, a very elegant project. I have a quick question. The theater building, which appears to go all the way back to...
Yes.
You're using the back piece of that, which was originally part of the main theater?
Yes.
As the brew house?
Yes.
As a cake?
The kegging space. So there is a reason for that, and thank you for bringing it up. So currently, there's a media group that did kind of an exploration of the architectural history of that building. And so there are great photographs that remain of what the building was, but what it is now is completely removed and different. The front portion that I have retained as a theater still has a stage. In the 1950s, the entire space was converted to a Salvation Army chapel and gym. So there's actually a little basketball court space in the back of the building. But there's already basically an overhead door and loading area that's in the back of that building. So it actually lends itself well to being used for that type of space.
Good answer. It's just so genius that this is like on Main Street. But the worst thing that you can do to a main street is create a gap in the building. So I guess I have a question. Did you consider putting the parking off of the alley, even just parallel parking, and moving the brew house to where right up to the street where if you could see the scale of those, that's the room that has the big silver. The scale of that is really interesting compared to the height of the vines and also the height of the historic buildings. And I'm just wondering if you had considered that.
I think that's a very fantastic idea. I think in my process I didn't really consider creating a new structure for some of the brew tanks. I know that in breweries, as they grow, they tend to need larger spaces for some more of those tanks that can be up to 2 stories. So maybe that's a potential future development opportunity that you could reclaim some of those spaces and kind of, the project becomes super successful and you need 200 barrel systems instead of 15 barrel systems. So thank you.
This is a very sophisticated project. I really love it, even down to the paper that it's presented on. I just think you've done graphically a really fantastic job, and it's very readable. And I commend you for that. I agree with some of the comments about this sort of gap in the street frontage, and also the parking being there. Some of the comments about the houses in the residential block, and I didn't know, maybe this was outside of the scope that you wanted to look at. I didn't know if you had ever thought about, instead of making the residential here and this your commercial zone, if you took those houses and had this as your residential and then were able to move and occupy this portion of the block.
So actually my first design phase was exactly as you suggested. I did have a housing block in where the hops yard was, and I had the hops yard where the new basketball court is. And I had done some work with it and worked with another architect who suggested kind of bringing that component of the kind of very visually intriguing hops yard to the forefront, so it's the first thing you see as you drive down Main Street from downtown.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So, and then I guess on that note, with the gap there, I guess one thing that we've all been talking about, I wondered the greenhouses that are there, is that something that you ever thought about filling that space again and then filling the parking behind there?
No, but I think that would certainly be an interesting idea to explore further.
So, I really appreciate what you've done, and I love the aspect of the spine, and unfortunately the streets don't align, but you'd love to see that kind of continue through somehow and maybe connect to another brewery in the neighborhood or something like that, so that becomes sort of part of a bigger element.
I want to say what's not to like about beer. But it's a very nice project too. I think putting the hops yard on that corner is really, perhaps I'm staring at that perspective, but it's very engaging. And I'm wondering if the detailing of those steel posts, I mean, with the circles on top, is there any functional reason for those capitals on the columns?
So the idea, I struggled to how best to interpret this, but so the mechanical elements of bicycles and ice cream systems was something that intrigued me. And so hops yards usually require some kind of anchoring as the plants get heavier in the later months. And so the idea was that you could almost post-tension them using cabling, which then I translated that architectural language into the interior of the beer garden to create operable facade systems that are pulley driven.
I would also get rid of the parking lot, and I would create a space inside that hops garden. Hollow, make a courtyard space inside or something where people can actually sit and drink beer.
That's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, everyone said it already. I was staring at your graphics and they're awesome. So very nice work there. And also the spine introduction is spot on in terms of what I would do as well. I guess the one question I have for you is the placement of the water tower, which intuitively is a great move because like you're not adding the water tower. I should say is a great move because like you're not really going high on the rest of the site. So it's nice to have that iconic moment. I question where you've kind of buried it. For this reason, I think if the parking lot were developed into more of a plaza and it was a bit more engaging, you're drawing people into that. And you could have a stage or some small performance stage or music, something at the base of that water tower to like actually make the space activate. Okay. That'd be awesome. Or if the water tower moved to be kind of like a gate or an entry point to one end of the spine that you've created, and it becomes more of a signature iconic image, kind of walking underneath it, it'd be cool. But I love that you put it in there, and I just wish you were getting a little bit more bang for it.
Okay.
So I just wanted to say thank you. It's been a great trip and exploration with you on this. I think, as everyone has said, it is elegant. It's, I think, really a testament to the strength of the dual degree program, bringing preservation and the heritage aspect, and what I just think is tremendous architectural design work together. So kudos on all of that. I mean, you really did take off and think about sustaining culture and sustaining community in a deep way, and I think that really matters, and I think that's really at the heart of where we're going with our preservation program. And you've thought about the others who have been left out of the conversation. You've thought about creating an active community space that we want to be in and that we can share together in this neighborhood. And so, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
And I also wanted to say that if I think back 2 or 3 weeks ago when we were having discussions about the presentation and what form it might take, there was a great degree of hesitation on your part, and perhaps you've thoroughly overcome that today. What's on the wall graphically is compelling. Your presentation was to the point and full of confidence, and your responses to the people in the front row were masterful. particularly the idea of accepting a suggestion and saying thank you. That might be a second phase. It's not often that you hear that from people that are young folks that are presenting ideas often are combative, and I think this was a much more brilliant way to go. I just want you to channel this as you move forward, because and this is actually for people back there too. I was in LA on Monday working with a donor who was in the process of starting a new office for his firm in LA. It's a DC-based firm. And he was telling me about lack of confidence that he had. And he's a very successful business person, a very successful architect. And I'm thinking to myself, he's going to succeed. And so there was a bit of lack of confidence moving into this, but you've succeeded, and I want you to just know that once you do that, it's a pattern for the rest of your life. So congratulations.
Thank you. I agree with everything that's been said. I just wonder where the Wright brothers are. Obviously, they're lionized all over Dayton. Their story is well told, but this is an interesting aspect of the story that isn't really part of that. And I appreciate that those are bicycle wheels, but I guess I would like to see, their story. It is an interesting building. It's part of this, so I guess ask you to think about how they might be brought back into this presentation.
Actually, can I add a little bit about that? One of the things that I didn't get to explore because this is an architectural project, but a lot of the motivation for why I selected a brewery as the program is the ability of the power of brand identity to convey pieces of heritage and history. A lot of breweries that on the local level that are successful really are deeply tied into their roots. Through branding, through the stories they tell, through the names they name their beer, the art they put on their walls, whether you put quotes of Paul and Dunbar or you put patent drawings, or you start to elevate these stories in a creative way. And so I would.
So we can look forward to Orville IPA, right?
Well, there is already a Red Right Flyer IPA at another brewery. So if you would like one, I can get you one.
So, Emma, one of the ways that might bring that into a clearer spotlight might be the development of the interiors of the proposal. So I just want to compliment you on where you went with that vertical surface. That was a struggle, and in a short period of time, man, is that believable? And it's gone for the better. But I'm left wondering about the interior space. I really want to know what that interior would be, the beer garden spaces. The series of little round perspectives are a bit stingy. And the section over here, unfortunately, it looks like you've taken the section through columns, which you would never do. Even if it was on that line, you'd bump them to show the columns in profile rather than as cut through. So it's hard to really get the sense of what the character, but a lot of that narrative could be told in that space, and there could be design of a storytelling medium, through the interior space. But that might be the next thing to think about as you go along.
It's almost a hangar.
It is, isn't it?
I mean, yeah.
When you have a hanger steak and a beer.
We've been having such a wonderful discussion of this very particular place that you've made, and I would say that the placemaking is masterful, but I do want to mention that this thesis really extends way beyond this particular place, because as you told us at the very beginning, this is about a Rust Belt city, and it's typical of so many Midwestern cities where there are so many gaps in the urban fabric. And I want to say how excited I am to see the way you have suggested that agriculture can take over some of these empty spaces in a city that's larger than it now needs to be. Also, how you can bring back actual manufacturing into a former industrial area that manufacturing is essentially clearing out of, and how you can tie those things together and somehow magically bring industry and agriculture to the service of the community. So just wanted to make the point that this is, I think, a wonderful example for how Midwestern cities can recapture that downtown life and thereby population, and put to use some of those places that in the Great American Way have just turned into parking lots.
The first time I visited this site, all I could see was what it was and what it could be, and I just wanted to see that come back. And so growing up in kind of this environment, it's kind of exciting to be able to use my skills to help try to solve these problems.
Yeah, I'd hate to lose you back to the Midwest, but I think you have a lot to contribute there.
Yeah, when Emma told me her thesis site was ice cream and beer, I knew that she had the right place.
Hi, Emma. So I have a question. So this area is obviously it's a redlined area, so it's most likely a heavily African American neighborhood, right? So it's obviously been disinvested since the 1930s, and as we've seen across the United States, a lot of these disinvested neighborhoods are unfortunately gentrified out with projects like this. How would you go about sort of preserving that community, preserving the people who you are trying to keep that heritage for, without sacrificing sort of like their story for property values, right?
Yeah, that I feel like as I approached this project, that was my biggest fear, was am I creating a place that, you know, goes in the opposite direction of building the community that is already there and providing places for people. One of the things that I felt like was interesting in the neighborhood was that you have this high rental occupancy rate. You know, local business owners are choosing to relocate to this area. There's a new realtor across the street. One of the only African American operated radio stations is also directly across the street from this site. And so I feel like some of these are more of those not architectural solutions, but political policy building and planning strategies that can be implemented here to make sure that these spaces are available to people that actually live in the neighborhood first, to make sure that we're serving the community that we're designing for.
So I had the privilege of seeing Emma speak at Preservation Maryland about the history of craft breweries specifically, and I think I'm incredibly proud of this project and you, Emma. But I think one of the things that unfortunately this group did not get to hear about is just the incredible amount of research that you put into this project. And I know you got a chance to talk for 20 minutes, but I think it's filmed somewhere, and the amount of just digging into not only the history of Dayton, but the history and legacy, and now this burgeoning craft brewery world, and that is really what it is. It is a world, is incredibly impressive, and I think does shine through here. And I know that there's just a wealth of knowledge inside you now that you are probably the leading expert on the architecture of craft breweries in the United States at this point, and that is a pretty impressive thing for a graduate student.
I'm going to wrap up. A lot of very good comments at all different scales. I think the review has been very, very positive. I think that reflects well on Emma. She's thorough to a fault. If it's not
make
right,
something that is a positive thing seem like
It's a gentle roast.
Exactly. Her research is extraordinary. Jamie can attest that she has over 150 pages on the craft brewing methodologies as well as all the technical aspects, etc. So she has a good knowledge base of the law in terms of preservation. She went through all these buildings and has photographs of all the various details, etc. What can be saved, what should be saved, what could be saved. She documented. She's a knitter. And I think most architecture students know what that means. She's down at the fine detail all the time, and sometimes she misses the big picture. But she always comes back to the detail. And so she understands how, you know, the window works above the bar that is between the existing building and the new beer garden. She's got that down pat. She's a detail fanatic. And she's also, of course, many of you know, was very heavily involved with the Solar Decathlon, where we had success out in Colorado. She was one of the spokespersons for that particular success. She and Malik shared the microphone many, many times, kind of dueling personalities. They both were phenomenal speakers about the house. Emma's been a great citizen of the school. She was my TA when I taught Urban the last time, and she was very, very serious about taking on that responsibility, etc. So she's been a very good citizen of the school. And the success, I think, is well earned. And so, congratulations.